The storm came to Black Ridge Mountains the way most trouble did, slowly at first, then all at once. October rain had been falling since noon, turning dirt roads to rivers of mud and filling the hollows with a gray mist that made distance impossible to judge. By 4 o'clock, the wind had teeth. By 6, it was tearing branches from trees that had stood for 100 years. And by 8, when the real darkness settled in, the storm owned every inch of those mountains. Jack Mercer Thorne sat at a workbench inside a cabin that had survived worse weather than this, though not by much. The structure had belonged to his grandfather, built in 1947 from local timber and stubbornness. Now it was Jack's inherited, along with the old man's debts and the silence that came with living 14 miles from the nearest town. The cabin was small, one main room with a wood stove, a kitchen counter that had seen better decades, and a back bedroom barely large enough for a bed. But it was paid for, which was more than Jack could say about most things in his life. He worked under the steady glow of a battery-powered lamp, his hands moving with the precision of someone who'd learned long ago that sloppy work got people killed. On the bench in front of him sat a handheld radio, its casing open, circuit board exposed. Next to it, a scrap of paper with notes in tight handwriting: frequency drift at 162,450, possible crystal degradation. This particular radio belonged to the county ranger station. They'd paid him $75 to fix it. Not much, but it was honest work, and honest work was what Jack needed right now. The envelope on the corner of the bench reminded him why. White paper, red stamp in the corner, final notice. Inside, a bill from the VA Medical Center, $23,447. 3 years of PTSD treatment that insurance wouldn't cover because the discharge papers said honorable, but the therapist's notes said complex trauma with dissociative features. Jack didn't look at the envelope often. Looking at it didn't change the number. He soldered a connection, tested the frequency with a handheld meter, and watched the needle settle where it should. Good. The ranger station would have working comms again, assuming the storm didn't tear down every antenna between here and town. Outside, the wind howled through the pines with a sound like something dying. Rain hammered the roof in waves, each gust louder than the last. Jack had weathered storms in places most people couldn't find on a map. Hindu Kush Mountains in winter, Helmand Province during monsoon season, the kind of weather that turned helicopters into death traps and supply lines into wishful thinking. But this storm felt different, personal somehow. Thunder rolled across the valley, deep and continuous, and Jack's hands went still on the workbench. Not because of the thunder, because of what came after. Silence. The wind didn't stop, the rain didn't let up, but something in the rhythm changed, like the night was holding its breath. Across the room near the wood stove, Sentinel lifted his head. The German shepherd had been lying with his chin on his paws, eyes half closed in that state of rest that never quite reached sleep. Now his ears rotated forward, triangulating on something Jack couldn't hear yet. The dog's body shifted from relaxed to alert in the space between heartbeats. No sudden movement, no wasted energy. Just the focused attention of an animal whose instincts had been honed by 3 tours in Afghanistan and 6 years of living with a man who understood what those instincts meant. Jack set down the soldering iron and listened. A low rumble formed in Sentinel's chest. Not a growl exactly. A question. "What is it, boy?" The dog's gaze fixed on the front door. His nostrils flared, testing the air that leaked through the gaps in the old frame. Whatever scent he'd caught, it didn't belong to the storm. Jack stood slowly, joints protesting. 39 wasn't old, but his body carried the miles of a man twice that age. Shrapnel scars across his left shoulder. A knee that ached before rain. Hands that trembled sometimes when he wasn't paying attention. He moved to the side window and used 2 knuckles to clear a crescent of condensation from the glass. Outside, the porch light carved a small circle of yellow into the darkness. Rain fell through it in silver sheets. Beyond that, nothing but black. Then movement. 2 figures stumbled into the light, soaked through, moving with the desperate coordination of people at the edge of their endurance. The first was a woman, small-framed, holding something against her chest that caught the light, a badge, Jack realized. The second was a man, taller, broader, one arm slung over the woman's shoulders as he struggled to keep his feet under him. Blood ran down the man's face in a steady stream, mixing with rain, too much blood to be anything simple. The woman's fist hit the door with a force that rattled the frame. 3 hard strikes, then her voice raw with exhaustion and fear. "Please, we're police officers. We need help." Jack didn't move immediately. Living alone in these mountains taught a man caution. Taught him that desperation made people do things they wouldn't normally do, and that a badge didn't always mean what it was supposed to mean. But Sentinel made the decision for him. The dog moved to the door, body-angled nose working the thin seam where air whistled through. His posture shifted, tension easing by a fraction. Not relaxed, but no longer expecting immediate threat. The judgment of an animal who'd spent years learning the difference between danger and desperation. Jack grabbed a tactical flashlight from its hook and stepped to the door. He didn't open it. Not yet. State your business. The woman's face appeared in the small viewing window, pale in the porch light, eyes focused despite obvious exhaustion. She held up the badge again, numbers catching the reflection, 247. Officer Hadley Pierce, Black Ridge County Sheriff. This is Deputy Landon Greer. Our vehicle went off the road. He's hurt. Radio's dead. We can't reach dispatch. She paused, swallowing hard. Please. Jack studied her face. Mid-20s red hair plastered to her skull. Freckles visible, even through the grime and exhaustion. Behind her, the man swayed, one hand pressed to his forehead, blood seeping between his fingers. The kind of wound that needed attention soon, or it would be too late for attention to matter. Jack made the call. He unlatched the door and pulled it open in one controlled motion, body angled to keep a defensive line flashlight ready. Come in, slowly. Hadley entered first, boots tracking water onto the old floorboards. She kept one hand on her belt, not reaching for her weapon, just maintaining that cop awareness that never fully switched off. Her eyes swept the cabin in 2 seconds, exits windows, the man at the workbench, the dog. Landon followed, shoulders filling the doorway, rain running off him in steady streams. He was younger than Jack had first thought, maybe late 20s, with the kind of build that came from honest work rather than gym time. His blonde hair was dark with blood and rain. His eyes, when they found Jack's face, were unfocused, pupils uneven. Not good. Sentinels circled them once close enough to catch scent, far enough to maintain space. His attention fixed on Landon, specifically on the head wound. The dog's nose worked overtime, nostrils flaring with each breath. Jack closed the door fast against the wind and threw 3 locks, 2 deadbolts and a slide bar. Practical, not paranoid. Out here, practical and paranoid looked the same. Sit, Jack said, pointing Landon toward the chair closest to the wood stove. Don't move your head more than you have to. Landon obeyed without argument, dropping into the chair with a grunt that spoke of pain held barely in check. Blood continued its steady journey down his face, dripping onto his uniform shirt, darkening the fabric from gray to black. Hadley remained standing, hands near her belt, watching Jack with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read people quickly. Her gaze moved from his face to his hands to the workbench behind him, taking inventory. Thank you, she said, voice rough from shouting over the storm. We didn't know if anyone would be up here. Jack moved to a cabinet near the sink and pulled out a first aid kit. Olive drab fabric, military issue, the kind that had followed him home from a world he'd tried to leave behind. Inside, everything sat exactly where it should: gauze tape, antiseptic, butterfly closures, trauma shears. He returned to Landon and knelt in front of the chair, bringing himself to eye level with the injury. The wound ran from hairline to eyebrow, deep enough that the edges gaped when Landon moved. The kind of cut that came from impact with something hard and unforgiving. Blood welled from it in steady pulses, running into the deputy's eye, down his cheek, collecting in his collar. When did this happen? Jack asked, voice even. 20 minutes, Hadley said from behind him. Maybe less. Tree came down across the road. Caught the windshield frame. He bounced forward, hit his head on the spotlight mount. Jack nodded once. 20 minutes. Long enough for the bleeding to be a problem, not long enough for the real complications to show themselves yet. He reached for Landon's wrist fingers, finding the pulse point. Strong, fast. The deputy's skin was cold, clammy, but that could be the rain. Look at me, Jack said. Landon tried. His gaze drifted left, then right, struggling to focus. When he finally managed it, Jack could see what he'd feared. The right pupil was larger than the left. Not by much, but enough. You black out? Jack asked. No, Landon said, then frowned. I don't think so. Do you know where you are? Mountains, north of... He trailed off, face tightening with the effort of remembering. North of Highway 19. What's your name? Landon Greer. Deputy, badge number. The frown deepened. 36 something. Jack glanced at Hadley. She was watching Landon with barely contained worry, jaw-tight eyes, too bright. Not just professional concern, something deeper. He's been getting worse, she said quietly. Confused, nauseous. He tried to joke about it at first, but the last 5 minutes... Jack returned his attention to the wound and began cleaning it with antiseptic-soaked gauze. Landon hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. Concussion, Jack said, not bothering to soften it. Grade 3, possibly worse. Could be skull fracture underneath. Bleeding's controlled for now, but that pupil dilation tells me there's pressure building. He needs a hospital. Hadley's breath hitched. We can't. Road's blocked. Radio's dead. Storm's not clearing for hours. Jack finished cleaning and applied butterfly closures to pull the wound edges together, then covered it with a pressure bandage. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before in places where hospital was a fantasy and survival was the best you could hope for. Then we stabilize here, he said. Keep him awake. Check his pupils every 15 minutes. Watch for vomiting, seizures, any change in consciousness. If any of that happens, he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Hadley wrapped her arms around herself, and for the first time Jack noticed she was shaking. Not from fear, from cold. Her uniform was soaked through water still dripping from her sleeves, her hair, the hem of her jacket. You're hypothermic, Jack said, standing. There's dry clothes in the back room, sweats and a thermal shirt. They'll be too big, but they're warm. She started to shake her head, then stopped herself. I can't leave him. He's 20 feet away. You'll be able to see him the whole time. And you're no good to anyone if you go down from exposure. Something in his tone must have reached her because she nodded once and moved toward the back room. She walked with the careful control of someone who was colder than she wanted to admit, each step deliberate, measured. Jack turned his attention to Sentinel. The dog had remained near Landon, watching with that unsettling focus animals sometimes had. Not aggressive, not protective, just observant. What is it, boy? Sentinel's nose moved closer to Landon's shoulder, nostrils working. The deputy noticed and tried to lean away, wincing at the movement. That's unsettling, Landon muttered. Jack crouched beside the dog and let his hand rest briefly on Sentinel's spine. The animal's muscles were coiled, ready, but not threatening. Jack had learned to read these signals the way other people read facial expressions. You smell like gasoline, Jack said to Landon. The deputy blinked, slowly processing. Yeah, probably. Tank ruptured when the tree hit. Fuel was leaking all over. Jack nodded. That explained the scent. But something else lingered under it, something that made Sentinel's attention sharpen. Fear. Not the surface kind that came from pain or surprise. Deeper. The kind that soaked into clothing and skin when someone spent hours knowing they were being hunted. Jack stood and moved to the workbench where the broken radio still lay open. Next to it sat his handheld spectrum analyzer, a piece of equipment that had no business being in a cabin this remote. But Jack had learned long ago that preparation beat improvisation when things went wrong. He picked up the police radio that Hadley had set on the counter when they entered. Water dripped from its casing. He thumbed the power switch. Nothing. He tried the secondary frequency selector, the emergency channel, override the backup battery indicator. Still nothing. Jack carried the radio to his workbench and set it under the lamp. Water damage could kill electronics, but water didn't kill them this completely. He pried open the casing with a small screwdriver and examined the circuit board. Scorch marks, not from fire, from electrical overload. The kind of damage that came from hitting a circuit with more voltage than it was designed to handle. The capacitors had blown, the resistors were fried, and the main processor chip showed discoloration consistent with an electromagnetic pulse. Jack set down the radio and reached for his spectrum analyzer. He powered it on and swept through the local frequencies, watching the needle dance across the display. Normal background radiation, normal interference patterns. But there at the edge of the band, a spike. Brief but unmistakable. Someone had hit these radios with a jammer. Professional grade. The kind of equipment that didn't show up in civilian hands without serious money or serious connections. Thunder cracked overhead close enough to rattle the windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Jack looked at the two officers in his cabin, one injured, one barely holding herself together, and felt the weight of a question he already knew the answer to. This wasn't an accident. From the back room, Hadley emerged wearing Jack's old Navy sweats and a thermal shirt that hung to her knees. Her hair was still wet, but her face had regained some color. She'd rolled the sleeves up, exposing forearms that were lean and scarred in ways that spoke of a life that hadn't been easy. She returned to Landon's side, checking his vitals with the methodical attention of someone who needed action to hold fear at bay. Jack cleared his throat. Your radios didn't die from the storm. Both officers looked at him. Someone hit them with an electromagnetic pulse, Jack continued. Targeted, professional, the kind of equipment that costs serious money and requires serious knowledge to use. Hadley's face went very still. Landon tried to sit straighter and immediately regretted it, grimacing. Are you sure? Hadley asked, voice carefully controlled. Jack held up the ruined radio. Circuit boards fried. Scorch patterns are consistent with high-voltage pulse damage. And there's residual electromagnetic interference still showing on the spectrum analyzer. He paused. Someone wanted you cut off from help. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Landon broke at words slightly slurred, but anger cutting through the confusion. Drug runners. We were tracking them. 2 days on their trail following the old logging routes through the ridges. They disappeared when the storm hit, Hadley added. Her hands had gone still on Landon's wrist. We lost their tracks in the mud. Then the tree came down and someone made sure you couldn't call for backup, Jack finished. Hadley's jaw tightened. She glanced at Landon, something passing between them that Jack couldn't quite read. Worry, yes, but also something else. A secret held too long a weight shared but not spoken. Outside, the wind shifted direction and a strange sound reached them. Faint, rhythmic, almost like Sentinel's head snapped up. His ears rotated forward, body going rigid. Footsteps, not close, maybe 50 yards out circling through the trees, the kind of movement that stayed just beyond sight but never quite left. Jack moved to the side window again and killed the interior lights with a switch near the door. Darkness swallowed the cabin. The wood stove's glow provided the only illumination, painting everything in shades of red and shadow. He pressed his face close to the glass and looked out into the storm. Lightning flickered brief and silver, and in that instant of illumination, Jack saw them. Boot prints in the mud, fresh, leading from the tree line to the edge of the porch. Deep impressions, the kind made by someone heavy moving with purpose. But no prints leading away, which meant whoever made them was still out there. Close, watching. Jack's pulse didn't quicken. His hands didn't shake. Years of training had taught him that fear was a tool, not a master. You acknowledged it used its edge to sharpen focus, then set it aside to do what needed doing. He grabbed his tactical flashlight and stepped onto the porch. Rain hit him immediately, cold and hard. The wind tried to tear the door from his hand, but he held it steady, pulled it closed behind him, and swept the flashlight beam across the clearing. The boot prints were clear, even with rain trying to wash them away. Standard treads, size 11, maybe 12. The stride pattern showed weight on the balls of the feet, the way someone moved when they were trying to stay quiet. Jack followed the prints with the light. They came from the north tree line, crossed 20 yards of open ground, climbed the porch steps, then stopped. Right at the door. Whoever made them had stood here listening. Maybe testing the door, maybe just gathering information. Then they'd gone, where Jack swept the light in wider arcs. No exit tracks. The mud should have held them, but there was nothing. Which meant the person had either backtracked perfectly in their own prints, difficult but possible, or they'd never left. Thunder rolled, and in the brief silence that followed, Jack heard it. A snap, sharp and quick. The sound of a branch breaking under weight. North tree line, 40 yards out. Jack didn't chase the darkness, didn't call out. He stood on the porch with rain soaking his shoulders and let his presence be known. Let whoever was out there understand that this cabin, this small circle of light in the mountains, was not undefended. After 30 seconds, he turned and went back inside. Hadley was standing now, one hand on her weapon tension, clear in her posture. Landon had tried to stand too, but Sentinel had positioned himself in front of the deputy, a gentle but firm barrier. 3 people, Jack said, water dripping from his hair. Maybe 4, military spacing, circling the perimeter. They're not amateurs. Hadley's face went pale. They followed us. Yes. From the ridge. Probably, or they were waiting. Jack moved to his workbench and pulled out a small cardboard box from underneath. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was his sidearm. A Sig Sauer P226, the same model he'd carried for 11 years in the teams. He checked the magazine, chambered around, and set it on the counter. Hadley's hand moved closer to her own weapon. What are you doing? Preparing. Jack looked at her. You said you were tracking drug runners. How many? 3 vehicles, maybe 8 to 10 people total. And you lost them in the storm. Yes. They didn't get lost, Jack said quietly. They were bought time. Someone knew you were coming. Someone wanted you isolated. He paused. Who knew your route? Landon tried to speak, failed, tried again. Dispatch, patrol supervisor, Sergeant Drexler. The name hung in the air like smoke. Hadley's breath caught just for a second, but Jack saw it. Saw the way her shoulders tightened, the way her hand moved unconsciously to her belt. What's on your belt? Jack asked. She looked down, confused. What? Your duty belt. What's on it? Hadley's hands moved over the equipment automatically. Cuffs, Benton, radio, spare magazine, taser. Her fingers stopped on a small black device clipped to the back. And this, upgraded equipment, Sergeant Drexler issued it 2 weeks ago, said it was new department tech. Jack stepped closer. May I? She unclipped it and handed it over, frowning. Jack held it under the lamp. Black plastic casing about the size of a deck of cards. LED indicator light on one side. Serial number on the back. He pried it open with a fingernail and immediately understood. This is a GPS tracker, he said. Law enforcement grade. Battery life of about 30 days. He looked at Hadley. Your sergeant hasn't been protecting you. He's been following you. The color drained from her face. No, that's not. He wouldn't. 2 weeks ago, Jack said. How long have you been investigating off the books? Hadley's mouth opened, closed. She looked at Landon, then back to Jack, and something in her expression crumbled. 14 months, she whispered. The wood stove popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the cabin, everything had gone very quiet. Hadley moved to the window, arms wrapped around herself. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible over the rain. My sister disappeared 14 months ago. Autumn, she was 19. Driving home from community college, taking the back roads through these mountains, because it was faster. Hadley's reflection in the glass was ghostly and substantial. They found her car 3 days later. Abandoned. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just gone. Landon shifted in his chair, pain written across his face, but he said nothing. This was Hadley's story to tell. The investigation went nowhere, she continued. No leads, no witnesses. The department classified it as a voluntary disappearance. Said she probably ran away. Started a new life somewhere. Her voice hardened. But I knew. I knew she wouldn't just leave. Not without telling me. We were all each other had after Mom died. Jack remained silent, listening. So I started looking on my own. Off duty, off the record. I pulled old case files, missing persons reports going back 5 years, and I found a pattern. Hadley turned to face them. 12 women, all between 17 and 30, all disappeared within 50 miles of this area, all on back roads, all written off as runaways or voluntary disappearances. Jesus, Landon muttered. I started mapping the locations, the dates, the routes. Her voice trembled as she spoke. They all disappeared near the old logging trails, the same trails the drug runners use. I thought maybe it was connected. Maybe someone was using those trails for more than drugs. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories like this before. Not often, but enough. The kind of evil that hid in plain sight in the gaps between jurisdictions, in the blind spots of overworked departments. Did you tell anyone? Jack asked. Landon, 6 months ago. No one else. Because, she took a breath, because every time I got close to something, every time I thought I had a lead, it disappeared. Files would go missing. Witnesses would recant. Routes would change. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Someone in the department was making it disappear. Outside, a low whistle cut through the storm. Not wind, not animal, human. Sentinel's body tensed, a different quality of alertness now. Threat confirmed. Jack moved to the spectrum analyzer and ran another sweep. The spike appeared again, stronger this time. Someone was using a handheld jammer, cycling it on and off to avoid detection. Professional, coordinated. He looked at Hadley, at Landon, at the dog, watching the door with absolute focus, and felt the situation crystallize into terrible clarity. They're not here for the drugs, Jack said. They're here for you, specifically you. He pointed at Hadley. You've been investigating for 14 months, building a case, documenting everything, and 2 weeks ago your sergeant gave you a tracking device disguised as equipment. He's known exactly where you've been, who you've talked to, what you've discovered. Hadley's phone sitting on the counter buzzed once. The screen lit up with a notification. She picked it up with trembling hands. One new message. Unknown number. She opened it, and Jack watched her face go white. She held the phone out so he could read, "Give up the Chen file or Sarah dies again. WD." "Chen, Mommy?" Jack asked. "Officer Maya Chen. She helped me 6 months ago. Cross-referenced databases, found connections I'd missed." Hadley's voice was hollow. "She transferred to another county last month. I thought it was career advancement." WD, Landon said the letters to taking visible effort. "Wallace Drexler." Hadley's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering on the floor. She stared at it like it was something poisonous. "He signed my hiring papers," she whispered. "He took me to lunch on my first day. He came to Autumn's memorial service. He told me he'd keep looking. that he wouldn't give up. The betrayal in her voice was physical, a wound deeper than anything Landon had suffered. Sentinel moved to her side without being called, pressing his body against her leg. The gesture was simple, ancient, the same comfort dogs had offered humans for thousands of years. Hadley's hand found his head, fingers curling into the thick fur. Jack picked up the phone and read the message again. "Who's Sarah?" "My sister's middle name was Sarah, Autumn Sarah Pierce." Hadley looked at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "He killed her. My mentor killed my sister. And now he's going to kill me." Thunder cracked overhead and the cabin's lights flickered once more. Jack set the phone down carefully and moved to the door. He opened it just enough to scan the darkness outside. 4 shapes now. He could see them in the tree line backlit by lightning. Spread out, patient, waiting for orders. He closed the door and turned back to the room. "They're not moving yet," he said. "They're waiting for something. Confirmation maybe, or a clear shot." Hadley had regained some control, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand. "We can't stay here. If they have numbers equipment, we're trapped." "The back trail," Landon asked, words slightly clearer now, adrenaline helping him push through the confusion. Jack shook his head. "Listen." They fell silent. Through the storm from the north side of the cabin came a deep groan of wood under pressure. Then a crack. Then the earth-shaking impact of something massive hitting the ground. The walls shuddered. Dust fell from the rafters. Outside the sound echoed and died. "Tree," Jack said. "Block the back trail." Hadley's face showed the calculation happening behind her eyes. "They're boxing us in." "Yes." "So what do we do?" Jack moved to a drawer and pulled out a topographic map of the area. He spread it on the workbench and the 3 of them gathered around it. Even Landon managed to stand, though he swayed and had to grip the bench for support. Jack's finger traced a line from the cabin down through the valley. Creek bed runs north for 4 miles. Heavy tree cover. Winds wrong for scent tracking. Ground soft but stable. "Ranger station," Hadley said, seeing where his finger stopped. "Radio's there. Old military surplus runs off generator. Storm won't affect it." "How do you know?" "Because I installed it," Jack said, 3 years ago. "County hired me for the job." Landon frowned, processing slowly. "You're saying one of us runs for it, gets help." "One of you," Jack corrected. "I stay. Make noise. Keep them focused here." "No," Hadley said immediately. "I won't let you." "It's not your choice." Jack's voice was quiet but absolute. "Greer can't run. Not with that head injury. He stays with me. You go." "I'm a cop. I can't abandon my partner." "You're not abandoning anyone. You're doing the smart thing, the tactical thing." Jack looked at her. "How many people have you trained in mountain navigation, night movement, evasion?" Hadley's silence was answer enough. "I have," Jack continued. 11 years, multiple deployments. I know what I'm doing. You don't." He softened slightly. "This is my terrain, my skill set. Let me use it." Outside voices carried on the wind. Too far to make out words, but close enough to hear the coordination. The planning, Jack made a decision. He moved to the gun safe tucked in the corner and opened it with a combination his fingers knew by heart. Inside, along with the rifle and ammunition, sat a tactical vest. Worn, patched in places, but functional. He pulled it out and began checking pockets. Flashlight, compass, knife, paracord, flares. "You're serious," Hadley said. "Yes." "I don't even know you." "No, but you know what they'll do if they catch you." Jack met her eyes. "And I know what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. I've made that mistake before. I won't make it again." Something in his voice, some old pain, barely hidden, made Hadley stop arguing. Landon spoke up, forcing the words through obvious difficulty. "Who are you, really?" Jack was quiet for a moment. "Then someone who used to be good at this, someone who failed when it mattered." He looked at Sentinel. "Someone who's been hiding in these mountains for 3 years trying to forget. But forgetting doesn't work." He looked back at them. "Your sister's name was Autumn." Hadley nodded. "Then we make sure her story doesn't end the way mine did." Jack moved to Sentinel and knelt, bringing himself eye level with the dog. His hand found the thick ruff of fur at the animal's neck. "Guard, guide, protect." Sentinel's ears came forward. His amber eyes held Jack's gaze with perfect understanding. "He'll take you to the ranger station," Jack said to Hadley. "Trust him. He knows the way, and he won't leave you, even if you tell him to." Hadley looked at the German shepherd, at this animal she'd known for less than an hour, and saw something there that made her chest constrict. Loyalty, purpose, the same qualities she'd sworn to uphold when she took her oath. "Okay," she whispered. Jack stood and pulled on the tactical vest. The weight of it settled across his shoulders like an old memory. Not comfortable exactly, but familiar. Right. He moved through the cabin methodical, now making preparations. He placed the tactical flashlight near the door, positioned Landon's chair to give best cover, checked sight lines from the windows. While he worked, Hadley geared up. Her duty belt went back on. Spare magazine, baton. The GPS tracker she threw in the wood stove. It sparked and melted plastic smoking. Jack handed her a waterproof map already marked with the route. Stay in the creek bed. Don't leave it even if you think you hear something. Wind plays tricks up here. About 2 miles in, you'll hit a fork. Take the eastern branch. The western one dead ends in a ravine. She took the map. What frequency for the radio? 162.550. FBI Task Force frequency. Ask for Agent Victoria Landry. Tell her Jack Thorne says it's time she looked at Wallace Drexler. Hadley's eyes widened. You know her. She interviewed me last year. Human trafficking case down in Tennessee. I couldn't help then, but I gave her names. Patterns. Jack's jaw tightened. If Drexler's involved, she'll believe you. Thunder rolled again closer now. The storm was reaching its peak, and in that chaos lay the best chance for escape. Jack moved to the side door, the one that opened onto the slope rather than the clearing. He cracked it open and let Sentinel slip through first. The dog disappeared into the darkness, then returned, giving a soft huff. Clear. Hadley paused at the threshold. She looked back at Landon, at Jack, at this strange man who'd decided to risk everything for 2 cops he'd just met. Why Wahomo, she asked. Why are you doing this? Jack's answer was quiet, but in it she heard the weight of years of choices of men who'd never come home. Because someone should have done it for them. She nodded once, then slipped into the storm with Sentinel at her side. Jack closed the door and threw the bolt. Then he turned to Landon. Can you shoot? The deputy managed a grim smile despite the pain. Yeah, I can shoot. Good. Jack moved to the workbench and grabbed the metal coffee pot. He hurled it against the far wall with a crash that echoed through the cabin. Followed it with a chair, dragging it across the floor with deliberate noise. Outside, the watchers would hear. Would think 3 people moving. Would believe their targets were still contained. Jack grabbed his rifle from the safe and worked the bolt. The sound was sharp, final. He positioned himself near the front window, where he had sight lines on the tree line, and settled in to wait. Landon checked his sidearm hand steadier now that purpose had replaced confusion. You know this might not work. Yes. We might not make it till help arrives. Yes. But you're still doing it. Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking about Kandahar, about the voices on the radio, about 2 men whose names he still heard in his sleep. Yes, he said finally. I am. Outside, the storm raged on. 4 figures moved through the darkness, tightening their circle. And somewhere below, running through rain and wind, with an old German shepherd at her side, Officer Hadley Pierce carried the hope that evil, no matter how carefully hidden, could still be dragged into the light. The cabin settled into waiting, and Jack Mercer Thorne, who'd spent 3 years trying to disappear, felt purpose settle into his bones like coming home. The creek bed was a living thing in the darkness, all sound and movement, and hidden dangers that reached for ankles with every step. Hadley Pierce moved through it with Sentinel pressed close to her left side, his body a warm constant in the chaos of wind and rain. Her boots found purchase on stones she couldn't see, trusting weight to surfaces that might shift or hold. Water ran past her calves, cold enough to steal feeling from her feet within minutes. Branches whipped across her face, and she kept one hand raised to protect her eyes, while the other stayed near her weapon. Sentinel moved like he'd been born to this. His paws found the stable rocks without hesitation. When Hadley's boot slipped on moss-slick stone, his shoulder was there, immediately bracing her weight until she steadied. He didn't rush, didn't pull, just led with patient confidence through terrain that would have broken her within a quarter mile. The storm screamed overhead, tearing through the canopy in gusts that sent whole trees swaying. Lightning flickered brief and silver, painting the world in snapshots of twisted branches and churning water. Thunder followed close enough to feel in her chest. Hadley's breath came hard and fast, visible in brief white clouds when lightning allowed vision. The thermal shirt Jack had given her was already soaked through. The navy sweats clung to her legs, heavy with water. Cold was creeping in from her extremities, that first warning sign she'd learned in academy training. Hypothermia doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, stealing function degree by degree until thinking becomes impossible and the body simply stops. She was maybe 15 minutes from the cabin. Another 3.5 miles to go. Her mind kept circling back to the same thoughts, unable to settle, unable to accept what the last hour had revealed. Wallace Drexler, sergeant, mentor, the man who'd taken her to lunch on her first day, who'd taught her how to write reports that wouldn't get kicked back, who'd shown up at Autumn's memorial service with flowers and a promise to never stop looking. He'd killed her sister, or ordered it done, which was the same thing. And now he was out there in the storm coordinating armed men to hunt her down because she'd gotten too close to something that had to stay buried. Hadley's foot came down on a rock that shifted under her weight. She went down hard, knee striking stone pane, flaring white and immediate. Water closed over her head for a second before she fought back to the surface, gasping. Sentinel was there instantly, teeth gentle on her jacket sleeve, pulling with steady pressure until she found her feet again. His eyes caught the next lightning flash, reflecting gold and steady. "I'm okay," Hadley said through chattering teeth. "I'm okay." But she wasn't. Her body trembled violently now. Her legs felt distant, disconnected. When she tried to take the next step, her foot dragged, catching on stone. Sentinel moved directly in front of her, blocking her path. He looked up at her face, then deliberately pressed his body against her legs. Heat radiated from him, penetrating the wet fabric. He didn't move, just stood there solid and warm while rain poured over both of them. Hadley sank down back against a fallen log, and Sentinel immediately positioned himself across her lap. 85 pounds of warm breathing insulation. His heart beat steady under her numb fingers. His breath came even and strong. "Just a minute," she whispered. "Just need a minute." But minutes were dangerous. Every second she delayed was another second Jack and Landon were alone against God knew how many attackers. Every breath she took sitting here was breath someone might not get to take because she'd been too slow. She thought about Autumn, 19 years old, red hair like Hadley's, same freckles, same stubborn jaw. The little sister who'd followed Hadley around like a shadow, who'd wanted to be a veterinarian, who'd laughed at stupid jokes and cried at sad movies. 14 months in a cage. If she was still alive. If Kyle Tennyson had been telling the truth. If Hadley could reach that radio in time. The cold was making her thoughts slow syrupy. She recognized the symptom even as it happened. Confusion. The first stage sliding into the second. Soon would come the paradoxical warmth, the desire to lie down, to rest, to sleep. Sentinel's tongue rasped across her face, rough and insistent. When she didn't respond fast enough, he did it again, adding a soft whine that carried surprising volume over the storm. "Okay," Hadley said. "Okay, I hear you." She pushed herself upright, using the log for leverage. Her legs protested, but they held. Sentinel stayed close, letting her rest one hand on his back as they started moving again. The creek bed climbed gradually, following the mountain's natural drainage. Trees pressed close on both sides, their roots exposed by erosion, creating a maze of barriers that had to be climbed over or around. Hadley's world narrowed to the next step, the next obstacle, the warm presence of the dog guiding her forward. Time lost meaning. Might have been 20 minutes, might have been an hour. The cold made everything distant and strange. Then Sentinel stopped. His body went rigid, one paw lifted, ears rotating forward. Not the alert posture he'd shown at the cabin. This was different. Hunting focus. Hadley's hand went to her weapon, fingers clumsy on the grip. She tried to listen past her own breathing, past the storm, but heard nothing unusual. Sentinel's head turned right, tracking something moving parallel to their position. 20 yards out, maybe 30. Something large enough to make noise despite trying for stealth. Hadley pulled the weapon and held it low, finger indexed along the frame. Her grip was unsteady, but close range didn't require precision. The sound grew closer. Branches breaking, boots on stone. Then a voicemail, young, pitched to carry over wind. "Officer Pierce, don't shoot, it's Kyle Tennyson." Hadley's weapon came up instantly. "How did he know her name?" "Drexler radioed us your name," Kyle shouted, reading her suspicion. "Told us what you looked like. I followed your trail from the cabin. The creek bed was the only way down." Sentinel's growl was immediate and absolute, a sound from deep in his chest that promised violence. "I'm not armed. I'm done with this." "Please," Hadley's finger moved to the trigger. "Stop where you are. Identify yourself." A figure emerged from the darkness upstream, hands raised, stumbling over rocks. Lightning caught him, late 20s, soaked through face, showing fear more than threat. He wore civilian clothes under a hunting jacket. No visible weapons. "Kyle Tennyson," he said, words tumbling fast. "I was with the others. They sent me after you. But I'm done. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't know about the girls." "On the ground," Hadley ordered. "Face down, hands behind your head." Kyle dropped immediately, splashing into the creek without hesitation. Okay, just don't shoot." Please. Sentinels circled him, nose working overtime, reading the truth that words couldn't hide. The dog's posture shifted slightly. Still alert, still ready, but the killing tension eased. Hadley kept the weapon trained on him while she moved closer. With her free hand, she patted him down. Found a hunting knife in a belt sheath, a phone in his pocket screen, cracked battery dead, a wallet with $43 and a Colorado driver's license. Roll over slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them. Kyle obeyed, and when lightning flashed again, Hadley saw tears mixing with rain on his face. They said it was just a scare job, he said. $3,000. Show up, look tough, make sure nobody interfered with a business deal. That's what Drexler told us. Just intimidation. He swallowed hard. Then I heard him on the radio, ordering Marcus to kill you if you ran. And I realized this wasn't scare tactics. This was murder. Who's Marcus? Marcus Reed, ex-military, works for Drexler sometimes, him and Vince Harlow. Kyle's words came faster, desperate. There's 4 of us total. Me, them, and Clayton Byers. Clayton's the worst. He's the one who handles disposal. Hadley's stomach turned. Disposal. Kyle closed his eyes. The girls, when they're used up or cause problems, Clayton makes them disappear. Old mine shafts, deep ones. Nobody ever finds them. Where are the girls kept? Patterson Mine, old copper operation, closed in the 80s. About 6 miles south of here off Forest Road 47. They keep them in the lower chambers. 10, maybe 11 women last I saw, in cages. Hadley's vision narrowed to a pinpoint. Describe them. I only saw them once. I wasn't supposed to. Sentinel's growl returned and Kyle flinched. Describe them, Hadley repeated, voice flat and dangerous. Young, all young, some looked like they'd been there a while, thin, scared. He hesitated. One had red hair, freckles. She looked kind of like you. The world tilted. Hadley's knees wanted to buckle, but she locked them, forced herself to stay standing. Is she alive? Last I saw, yeah, 2 days ago. Drexler was arguing with some guy about transport schedules. The redhead was in the back cage. 14 months. Autumn had survived 14 months. The realization hit Hadley like a physical blow. All the grief, all the memorial services, all the nights crying into her pillow believing her sister was dead. And Autumn had been alive, suffering, waiting for rescue that never came. Until now. Hadley pulled out the handcuffs from her belt. Her fingers fumbled with them twice before she got them locked around Kyle's wrists, securing his hands behind his back. You're coming with me, she said. If you're lying about any of this, I'm not, I swear, I just want out. Kyle looked up at her, and despite everything, she saw genuine terror there. But you should know, they've got at least 6 more guys at the mine, armed. Drexler's there now coordinating everything. If you go there alone, you won't make it. I'm not going there. I'm going for help. FBI won't get here in time. Storm's grounded helicopters. Roads are flooding. Even if you radio them now, it's hours before anyone arrives. Hadley knew he was right, knew that every minute of delay was another minute Autumn and the others sat in cages. But what choice did she have? She was one cop with a service weapon and a doe, against 6 or more armed men in defensible terrain. Suicide wasn't courage, it was waste. Get up, she ordered. Walk ahead of me. Try anything and the dog takes you down. Kyle struggled to his feet, hands secured behind him. He started walking upstream, and Hadley followed, weapon trained on his back, Sentinel moving between them like a furry barrier. They made better time with Kyle breaking trail. His fear was genuine enough that he didn't slow them down, didn't try anything stupid. Just walked stumbling, occasionally always getting back up. The cold continued its assault. Hadley's teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue tasted copper. Her hands were white fingers, barely able to maintain grip on the weapon. But Sentinel's warmth, when he pressed against her leg, kept her moving, kept her focused. After what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, the creek bed widened. Trees thinned. Through the rain, a structure appeared. Square, concrete, a radio antenna rising from its roof. The ranger station. Hadley's relief was so intense it made her dizzy. On your knees, she told Kyle. He dropped immediately. Hadley moved past him to the station door. Locked, but she'd seen enough ranger stations to know the trick. She felt along the door frame until her numb fingers found the magnetic key box. Inside, a single key. The door opened into a small office, 2 desks, filing cabinets, a wall of maps. And in the corner, exactly as Jack had promised, a radio setup that looked military grade. Green metal casing frequency dials a microphone on a coiled cord. Hadley moved to it, fingers clumsy with cold. Found the power switch, held her breath. The unit hummed to life. Lights flickered across the display. Beautiful functional lights. She grabbed the microphone and keyed the transmit button. Her voice came out rough, barely controlled. Mayday, Mayday. This is Officer Hadley Pierce, badge 247, Blackridge County Sheriff. I am requesting immediate FBI assistance. Multiple officer code 0. Human trafficking operation confirmed. Request emergency response to Patterson Mine Forest Road 47. Multiple victims in immediate danger. Static answered her. Then a voice, female professional, cutting through the interference with startling clarity. Officer Pierce, this is FBI Special Agent Victoria Landry, Human Trafficking Task Force. Confirm your situation and location. Hadley's eyes closed. Thank God. Agent Landry, I'm at the Ranger Station, Northern Sector, Blackridge Mountains. I have credible intelligence that 11 women are being held at Patterson Mine. My sister Autumn Pierce is among them. Sergeant Wallace Drexler of Blackridge County Sheriff is coordinating the operation. He's ordered my execution. I have one witness in custody. A pause. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was tight with controlled fury. Pierce, I've been building a case against Drexler for 11 months. I couldn't get enough evidence. But if what you're saying is true, it's true. I have his text threatening me. I have witness testimony. And Jack Thorne says it's time you looked at Drexler. Another pause, longer this time. Jack Thorne vouches for you. Yes. Then I believe you. The sound of papers rustling, orders being given to someone off mic. Helicopters are grounded. Ground units will take minimum 90 minutes to reach you. Weather's that bad. Can you hold position? Hadley looked out the window at the storm, thought about Jack and Landon facing down armed attackers, thought about Autumn in a cage with a clock running down. Negative. I'm going to Patterson Mine. Pierce, do not engage. That is a direct order. You wait for... My sister has been in a cage for 14 months, Agent Landry. Drexler's ordered executions. If I wait 90 minutes, there won't be anyone left to save. Hadley's voice broke. I'm going, with or without backup. Silence. Then Victoria's voice, softer now. You're not a federal agent. I can't order you. No, but you can get there as fast as you can. Forest Road 47, Patterson Mine. If I'm not there when you arrive... Hadley took a breath. Tell my sister I never stopped looking. She released the transmit button before Victoria could respond. Set down the microphone, turned to find Sentinel watching her with those steady amber eyes. Last chance to be smart, Hadley whispered. We could wait. Let the professionals handle it. Sentinel's tail thumped once against the floor. Yeah, that's what I thought. She looked at Kyle, still kneeling outside in the rain. How many guards at the mine? 6, maybe 7, plus Drexler. How are they armed? Rifles, handguns. Clayton has a shotgun. How are the women secured at cages? Welded steel, padlocked. Keys are on a ring in the foreman's office. Hadley's mind raced. 7 armed men, defensible position, 1 cop with a service weapon and 15 rounds, a German shepherd who'd already proven himself loyal beyond reason, and a witness who might or might not be telling the truth about everything. The smart play was to wait, but Autumn was there, right now, 6 miles away. And Hadley had made a promise 14 months ago, standing at a memorial service while a casket containing someone else's daughter was lowered into the ground. A promise that she would never stop looking, never stop fighting. She checked high her weapon, 14 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 15 chances to make this work. Change of plans, Hadley said to Kyle. You're going to take me to Patterson Mine, and you're going to get me inside without alerting every guard. If you do that, if you help me save those women, I'll tell the FBI you cooperated. You'll get consideration. She stepped closer. But if you're setting me up, if this is some elaborate trap, I will personally make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cell where the other inmates know exactly what you helped do to those women. Do you understand? Kyle nodded frantically. I understand. I'll help. I swear. Hadley looked at Sentinel. Guard him. If he runs, take him down. The dog's posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Kyle was now a target to be tracked. Hadley moved back to the radio and keyed the microphone one more time. Agent Landry, if you're still listening, tell Jack Thorne that Sentinel's doing his job. And thank you for believing me. She clicked off the radio and stepped out into the storm. The ranger station had a maintenance shed attached to the main building. Inside, Hadley found tools, emergency supplies, and most importantly, a first aid kit with heat packs. She cracked 4 of them, stuffing 2 inside her boots and 2 under the thermal shirt against her ribs. The warmth was immediate and profound. There was also a rain slicker, bright yellow, designed for visibility. She took it anyway. Being seen was better than dying of hypothermia. In the back of the shed behind a stack of spare radio equipment, she found something else. A flare gun in 3 rounds. Not a weapon exactly, but something that made noise and light and could serve as a signal if everything went wrong. She loaded it and tucked it in her belt. Kyle was watching when she emerged. Patterson Mine is 6 miles south. Trail's rough, but drivable if you've got 4-wheel drive. We're walking, Hadley said. In this, that's 3 hours at least. Then we better move fast. The trail Kyle led them down was barely visible, more suggestion than path. It wound through dense forest following the mountain's natural contours. In daylight, it might have been scenic. In storm darkness, it was claustrophobic, hostile, alive with the sounds of trees dying. Hadley's body had moved past cold into a strange floating numbness. The heat packs helped, but they couldn't overcome the reality of soaked clothing and mountain wind. Her thoughts started to drift to wander, and she had to consciously pull them back. Sentinel stayed close, occasionally pressing against her leg when she wavered. His warmth was grounding. His presence kept her moving when her body screamed to stop. They walked for an hour, then 2. Kyle stumbled frequently with his hands cuffed, but he kept going, fear apparently a stronger motivator than comfort. Lightning grew more frequent as they descended, flickering through the canopy like a strobe. Thunder was constant now, one continuous roll that made conversation impossible. Then Kyle stopped. He turned to Hadley, shouting over the storm, "Half-mile ahead, trail opens to a clearing. Mine entrance is on the far side." Hadley nodded. Her fingers had gone beyond numb into painful. She wasn't sure she could pull a trigger if she had to. Wasn't sure she could hold the weapon steady. But autumn was ahead. Just ahead. The thought gave her strength she shouldn't have had. They moved slower now, more careful. The trail widened, trees thinned. Through the rain, structures appeared. Old buildings, weathered gray roofs, partially collapsed. Mining equipment rusted where it had been abandoned 40 years ago. And lights. Electric lights. Someone had brought power to this dead place. Hadley pulled Kyle behind a fallen crane, crouching in its shadow. Sentinel settled beside her, perfectly still, perfectly quiet. 3 vehicles sat in front of the main mine entrance. Trucks, 4-wheel drive, expensive. Drexler's was unmistakable, a black Ford with county plates. 2 guards stood at the entrance, trying to stay dry under a metal awning. They held rifles casually, but their posture was alert, professional. "Where are the others?" Hadley whispered. Kyle pointed. 2 inside the main chamber. Clayton's probably down in the lower levels with the girls. Drexler's in the foreman's office. That building there, separate from the main structure. And the last one, roving patrol, could be anywhere. 7 total. Hadley had 15 bullets. The math was brutal, but she hadn't come this far to turn back. She looked at Sentinel. The dog's eyes reflected the distant lights, alert and ready, waiting for direction. "I need you to trust me," Hadley said softly. "Both of you." She looked at Kyle. "How do we get inside without being seen?" Kyle swallowed hard. "There's a ventilation shaft, eastern side, grates rusted through, drops into a secondary tunnel, comes out in the lower level past the guards." "How do you know?" "Because that's how I got out last time I was here. When I saw the girls and realized what this really was." Hadley studied his face. Fear, yes, but also something else. Guilt. The kind that ate a person from the inside. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe this was his attempt at redemption. Or maybe it was a perfect trap. Only one way to find out. "Show me," Hadley said. They moved through the shadows using abandoned equipment for cover. The storm helped, driving the guards deeper under their awning, limiting their visibility. Rain was a curtain concealing everything beyond 10 feet. The ventilation shaft was where Kyle said it would be. A concrete structure rising from the ground, rusted grate hanging at an angle. The opening was maybe 3 feet across. Hadley looked down into darkness that swallowed her flashlight beam. "How far at 20 feet? There's standing water at the bottom, maybe 2 feet deep. Tunnel runs south about 100 yards, then opens to the lower chamber. And the girls, past that, another 100 yards. You'll hear them before you see them." Hadley took a breath. This was insane. She was one cop, already hypothermic, about to descend into a mine controlled by armed criminals. Every tactical training manual she'd ever read said to wait for backup. But backup was 90 minutes away. And autumn was here. Now. She looked at Sentinel. "Can you fit?" The dog approached the shaft, measured it with his eyes, then looked back at her. His tail wagged once. "That would have to be enough." "Kyle first," Hadley said. You guide us. If you're lying, Sentinel gets you first. Kyle nodded and approached the shaft. With his hands cuffed behind him, descent was awkward. He had to lower himself feet first, finding purchase on the shaft's metal rungs. Halfway down, his foot slipped. He yelped, catching himself, but the sound echoed. Hadley froze, weapon drawn, watching the guards at the main entrance. They looked up, scanning. One said something to the other. They both laughed. Just the storm. Just another branch falling. Kyle reached the bottom. His voice drifted up small and far away. Clear. Hadley holstered her weapon and started down. The rungs were slick with rain and rust. Her numb fingers could barely grip. Twice she nearly fell, catching herself at the last second. Then she was in water, up to her knees, cold enough to steal her breath. She clicked on her flashlight. The beam showed concrete walls, water running in streams, and Kyle standing 20 feet ahead, waiting. Above, Sentinel's silhouette appeared against the sky. He hesitated only a moment, then launched himself into the shaft with the kind of faith that made Hadley's chest constrict. He hit the water with a splash, went under completely, then surfaced, shaking his head. Within seconds, he was beside Hadley, pressing against her leg. "Let's go," she whispered. They moved through the tunnel, water sloshing with each step. The flashlight beam bounced off wet walls, creating shadows that seemed alive. Somewhere ahead, machinery hummed. Voices carried, distorted by acoustics. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and Hadley killed the flashlight immediately. Natural light filtered in from above, dim and gray. The chamber had been carved from living rock with support beams added later. Equipment sat rusting against walls, and across the space 3 men stood around a table covered with maps. None of them were looking in her direction. Kyle pointed to a doorway on the far side, mouthed the word girls. Hadley's heart hammered. So close. They were so close. She started to move, staying in shadows, using equipment for cover. Sentinel matched her pace, exactly, silent as smoke. They were halfway across when one of the men turned to grab something from a shelf. His eyes met Hadley's. Time fractured. The man's mouth opened. Hadley's finger moved to the trigger. Then a massive crack of thunder shook the mine. Lights flickered. The man blinked, looked away, muttered something about the storm. He hadn't seen her. The darkness and his night blindness from working under lights had saved her. Hadley's heart hammered so hard she thought it would give her away. She pressed deeper into shadow, hand on Sentinel's collar, holding him still. The man returned to the table. "Power's sketchy. Generators dying." Another man grunted. "Drexler better get that fixed. Can't work in the dark." Hadley waited 30 more seconds, then moved. For a heartbeat, they both froze. Then he opened his mouth to shout. Sentinel was already moving. The dog crossed 30 feet in 3 bounds and hit the man chest high, driving him backward into the shelf. The impact was enormous. The man went down, and Sentinel's teeth were at his throat, not biting but promising. The other 2 men spun, reaching for weapons. Hadley's training took over. She dropped into a combat stance, weapon up, voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who'd made peace with what came next. "Blackridge County Sheriff, hands where I can see them now." The men hesitated. In that hesitation, Hadley saw them making calculations. 2 of them. 1 cop. Odds they liked. Then they saw the look in her eyes and understood that odds didn't matter. She would shoot, without hesitation, without mercy. Their hands came up slowly. On the ground, face down, do it now. They dropped, and Hadley was on them instantly, using zip ties from her belt to secure their wrists behind their backs. Her fingers were so numb it took 3 tries, but she got them restrained. Sentinel held his position on the 3rd man, growling low and continuous. "Where are the women?" Hadley demanded. The man under Sentinel's teeth couldn't speak, but one of the others, face pressed to concrete, answered. "Lower chamber, south tunnel, but you're too late," Drexler ordered. Hadley didn't wait for him to finish. She grabbed Kyle and ran for the doorway he'd indicated, Sentinel at her heels. The south tunnel was darker, narrower. Support beams showed rot. Water dripped steadily, and ahead she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. Screaming, women's voices, pleading, crying, and a man's voice, calm and clinical, saying something about schedules and disposal protocols. Hadley's walk became a run. The tunnel opened into another chamber, and the scene that greeted her would live in her nightmares forever. 11 cages, welded steel, arranged in rows, and inside them, women. Young women. Girls, some of them. Thin to the point of starvation. Filthy, terrified. And standing in front of them, holding a clipboard, was Clayton Byers. He held a shotgun in his other hand, barrel pointed at the nearest cage. He turned when Hadley entered, and his face registered first surprise, then calculation. Well, he said slowly. Officer Pierce, we've been looking for you. Hadley's weapon came up both hands despite the shaking. Drop it. Last warning. Clayton smiled. You shoot me, this shotgun might accidentally discharge. Awful close to these cages. Awful lot of innocent people might get hurt. He tilted his head. So let's talk about this. You put your gun down, you walk out of here. We forget you were ever here. How's that sound? Hadley's eyes scanned the cages, looking for red hair, for freckles, for the face she'd memorized from 1,000 photographs. There, back corner, farthest cage. A woman emaciated, dirty red hair matted and tangled, but alive. Looking at Hadley with eyes that had given up hope so long ago, they barely registered what they were seeing. Autumn. Last chance, Clayton said. Gun down, or I start shooting. Hadley's finger moved to the trigger. The range was maybe 20 feet. Center mass shot, 90% chance she'd drop him before he could fire. But 10% chance she wouldn't. 10% chance that shotgun would discharge into a cage full of innocent women. The math was terrible. But Hadley had learned something in the last few hours. Sometimes you didn't wait for good odds. Sometimes you made your move and trusted that justice, or fate, or God was paying attention. She fired 3 times fast and controlled exactly as she'd been trained. All 3 rounds hit Clayton center mass. He went down hard, shotgun clattering from his hands, skittering across concrete. The gunshots echoed like cannon fire in the confined chamber. The women in the cages screamed. Some ducked, covering their heads. Others pressed against the bars. And in the back cage, Autumn Pierce finally recognized her sister. Footsteps thundered in the tunnel, voices shouting. The guards had heard. Sentinel guard the entrance, Hadley commanded. The dog positioned himself at the tunnel mouth, body low ready. When the first guard appeared, weapon raised, Sentinel launched. The man went down hard, gun skidding away. Sentinel's teeth found his wrist, not biting through but holding with absolute force. A second guard appeared, saw his partner down the dog Hadley with weapon raised. FBI is 3 minutes out. Hadley lied with complete authority. You fire 1 shot and you're looking at federal murder charges on top of trafficking. Drop it, now. The guard hesitated, calculated, set his weapon down. On the ground, face down. He complied. Kyle zip-tied him with shaking hands. In the distance, sirens, real ones this time. Hadley. The word was so quiet, so broken, it barely qualified as sound. But Hadley heard it. She ran to the cage, falling to her knees at the bars. Up close, Autumn was worse than she'd looked from a distance, bruised, scarred, haunted, but alive. I'm here, Hadley said, tears streaming. I'm here. I never stopped looking. I never gave up. They said, Autumn's voice broke. They said you forgot, that you moved on, that nobody was coming. They lied. Hadley's hands found Autumn's through the bars, skin and bone, barely any warmth. I never forgot, not for 1 day. Kyle appeared in the doorway out of breath. Keys. The foreman's office, I'll get them. He vanished. Sentinel positioned himself near the tunnel entrance, watching for threats. Hadley stayed at the cage, holding her sister's hands, whispering promises she intended to keep. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the storm with mechanical persistence. Red and blue lights painted the mine entrance in strobing colors. And for the first time in 14 months, Autumn Pierce began to believe that rescue was real, that her sister had kept her promise, that survival against impossible odds was still possible. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the storm with mechanical persistence. Red and blue lights painted the mine entrance in strobing colors that turned rain into falling jewels. Hadley stayed on her knees at the cage, holding Autumn's hands through the bars, unwilling to let go, even as the world above erupted with activity. Kyle returned at a run, keys jangling on a heavy ring. His fingers fumbled with them as he sorted through, trying lock after lock. The 4th key turned with a grinding click, and the cage door swung open. Autumn collapsed forward into Hadley's arms. She weighed nothing, all bones and angles, her body racked with sobs that came from somewhere so deep they might never fully surface. Hadley held her sister and felt 14 months of grief, rage, and desperate hope break like a fever. I've got you, Hadley whispered. You're safe now. I've got you. Around them, the other women pressed against their cage doors, hands reaching through bars, voices rising in a chorus of pleas. Hadley looked up at Kyle through tear-blurred vision. All of them, she said. Open every cage. Kyle nodded and moved down the row, working through keys with frantic speed. Each lock that opened released another flood of emotion. Women stumbled out, some falling immediately, legs too weak to hold them. Others clung to each other or to Kyle, or to the bars of cages that had held them for weeks or months. Sentinel moved among them with careful dignity, letting the women touch him, draw strength from his solid presence. More than one buried her face in his fur and wept. Footsteps thundered in the tunnel. Hadley's hand went to her weapon, but the figures that emerged wore FBI windbreakers and tactical gear. They swept the chamber with weapons raised, clearing corners, securing threats that had already been neutralized. Agent Victoria Landry entered last moving with the controlled urgency of someone who'd spent years in this work and still felt every failure personally. She was in her late 40s, silver threading through dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face showed the lines of too many late nights and cases that stayed with her long after files closed. Her eyes found Hadley immediately took in the scene, and something in her expression shifted. Relief, vindication, the look of someone who'd been proven right after fighting alone for too long. "Officer Pierce," Victoria said, voice carrying authority that expected obedience. "Status?" Hadley managed to stand though her legs protested. Autumn remained on the ground, curled into herself, shaking. 11 victims recovered, 4 suspects secured, 1 fatality. She gestured to Clayton's body. "He was about to execute them. I had no choice." Victoria's gaze moved to the fallen man, the shotgun, the cages. She nodded once. "Justified. We'll document everything, but this is clean." She keyed her radio. "Medical, we need immediate transport for 11 women. Hypothermia protocols. Some appear to have been held long-term. Move with care." Paramedics flooded the chamber within minutes, carrying thermal blankets, medical bags, stretchers. They moved with practiced efficiency, assessing each woman, starting IVs, wrapping them in layers of warmth. The chamber transformed into organized chaos, every available surface becoming treatment space. A young paramedic, barely out of training by the look of him, knelt beside Autumn. "Miss, I need to check your vitals. Can you tell me your name?" Autumn's voice came out as broken whisper. "Autumn. Autumn Sarah Pierce." He glanced at Hadley, then back to Autumn with dawning understanding. "You're the sister, the one she never stopped looking for." Autumn nodded, unable to speak past the tears. The paramedic's professional mask slipped for just a moment, showing raw emotion underneath. "Then you're going to be okay. We'll make sure of it." Victoria touched Hadley's shoulder, drawing her attention. "I need to know everything. Start from the beginning." Hadley's exhaustion was physical weight pressing down on shoulders that had carried too much for too long. But she forced herself to focus to give Victoria what she needed. She explained the investigation, the tracking, the GPS device Drexler had planted, the text message, Kyle's testimony, the descent into the mine. As she spoke, more FBI agents moved through the chamber, documenting everything with cameras and evidence bags. They photographed the cages that locked Clayton's body. They collected the clipboard he'd been holding, its pages filled with dates and names and notations that would fuel nightmares and prosecutions for years. "Where's Drexler now?" Victoria asked when Hadley finished. "Foreman's office, that's what Kyle said." Victoria's jaw tightened. She turned to her team. "Donovan Kim with me. We're bringing in Wallace Drexler. Pierce, you stay here. That's not a request." Hadley wanted to argue, wanted to be there when they took Drexler down, but Autumn's hand found hers squeezing with surprising strength, and the choice became clear. "Understood," Hadley said. Victoria and her team moved out with weapons drawn. Hadley sank back down beside Autumn as the paramedic worked, checking pupil responses, listening to her heart, making notes on a tablet with swift efficiency. "Malnutrition," he said quietly. "Dehydration. Some old injuries that healed wrong. But she's stable. Tough as they come, your sister." He looked at Hadley. "You don't look much better. When's the last time you were warm?" "I don't know. Hours ago." "Let me check you out." Hadley started to refuse, but Sentinel pushed his nose into her hand, a gentle insistence. The dog was right. She'd pushed her body past its limits, and adrenaline would only carry her so far. The paramedic wrapped her in a thermal blanket and started an IV with practiced hands. The warmth from the blanket was immediate and profound, and Hadley felt her body begin to shake as it realized safety had arrived. Across the chamber, the other women were being loaded onto stretchers, each attended by medical personnel who murmured reassurances and promises. Some women were conscious enough to speak, giving names and hometowns. Others simply stared, eyes seeing things far beyond the present moment. One girl, barely 18 by the look of her, asked the same question over and over. "Is it real? Are we really leaving?" Her paramedic answered patiently each time. "Yes, you're really leaving. You're safe now." The girl wept, and the sound was relief so pure it hurt to hear. Minutes passed, marked by the steady drip of IV fluids and the organized movement of rescue personnel. Then gunfire cracked in the distance. 3 shots fast and controlled. Hadley's hand went to her weapon, but before she could move, voices carried through the tunnels. Victoria's team coordinating. Then Victoria's voice came over the radio, steady and professional. Suspect in custody. Multiple additional suspects secured. No agents injured. We're bringing them up. The tension drained from the chamber. Hadley closed her eyes and let exhaustion wash over her in waves. It was done. Finally, impossibly, it was done. The foreman's office was locked. Victoria signaled her team. They stacked at the door. Wallace Drexler, FBI, come out with your hands visible. Silence. Then Drexler's voice muffled through wood. I have a hostage, Kyle Tennyson's partner. You breach, he dies. Victoria's jaw tightened. Bluff or truth? We have 11 victims testifying against you, Wallace. Bank records, manifests. It's over. Don't make this worse. A pause, then. I gave 31 years to this county. 31, and what did I get? Shit pay, missed birthdays, a wife who left me. I earned this. You earned a trial, not a firefight. Another pause longer. The sound of something heavy being moved. Then the door opened. Drexler stood there, hands raised, weapon on the floor behind him. No hostage. Just a desperate man who'd finally run out of road. I want a lawyer, he said. Victoria cuffed him personally. You'll get one. Victoria returned 20 minutes later with Wallace Drexler in handcuffs. He looked smaller, somehow diminished. His uniform was rumpled, his carefully maintained image cracked beyond repair. But his face still held defiance, the look of someone who believed rules applied differently to him. His eyes found Hadley across the chamber. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Drexler's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. You were a good cop, Pierce, he said. His voice carried the same paternal warmth that had once made Hadley trust him. Could have had a real career, but you couldn't leave well enough alone. Hadley stood, the thermal blanket falling from her shoulders. She crossed the chamber until she stood directly in front of him, close enough to see the broken capillaries in his eyes, the gray stubble he'd missed shaving that morning. You killed my sister. I saved her, Drexler corrected. Gave her purpose, value. She was nothing before. Just another small-town girl heading nowhere. The words were calculated to wound, delivered with casual cruelty. Hadley's hand moved toward her weapon, not quite touching it, just acknowledging the possibility. Victoria stepped between them smoothly. Not worth it, Pierce. He wants you to lose control. Don't give him that. Hadley held Drexler's gaze for 3 more seconds, letting him see exactly what she thought of him, what she'd do given the chance. Then she turned away, dismissing him as thoroughly as if he'd ceased to exist. Get him out of my sight, she said. Victoria nodded to her agents. They hauled Drexler toward the tunnel, and he went without further protest, his moment of power already fading into irrelevance. The evacuation took another hour. Each woman was stabilized, documented, and carefully transported to waiting ambulances. Autumn refused to leave Hadley's side, holding her sister's hand with grip that bordered on painful. Hadley didn't complain. After 14 months of separation, a little discomfort was nothing. When Autumn's turn came for transport, she looked at Hadley with sudden panic. You're coming with me. Promise you're coming. I promise. I won't leave you. Not for a second. They loaded Autumn onto a stretcher, and Hadley climbed into the ambulance beside her. Sentinel jumped in without invitation, settling near Hadley's feet. The paramedic started to protest, then saw the look in Hadley's eyes and decided regulations could be flexible. The ambulance ride down the mountain was surreal, all smooth motion and beeping monitors and the steady drip of IV fluids. Hadley held Autumn's hand and watched her sister's face, memorizing the reality of her presence. Alive. Breathing. Safe. Autumn's eyes drifted shut, exhaustion finally claiming her. The paramedic checked her vitals and nodded to Hadley. She's sleeping. Best thing for her right now. Body needs rest to start healing. Will she be okay physically? In time, yes. Malnutrition can be reversed. Injuries heal. It's the other stuff that takes longer. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Hadley understood. The physical wounds were the easy part. The psychological damage, the trauma that would wake Autumn in the middle of the night for years to come, that would be the real battle. But they would fight it together, that was enough. The ambulance pulled into Black Ridge Regional Medical Center as dawn broke over the mountains. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and brilliant. Light touched the peaks with gold, and for the first time in what felt like years, Hadley allowed herself to believe things might actually be okay. The hospital became controlled chaos as 11 ambulances arrived in succession, each carrying women who'd been missing for weeks or months. The staff handled it with the kind of professionalism that spoke of training and dedication, creating space, finding resources, making the impossible work. Autumn was taken directly to a private room, and Hadley followed, refusing to leave despite exhaustion that made her vision blur. A doctor examined Autumn with gentle thoroughness, documenting every injury, every sign of long-term captivity. His face remained professionally neutral, but Hadley saw anger flash in his eyes when he noted certain details. "She'll need to stay for at least a week," the doctor said finally. "Nutritional rehabilitation, fluid balance monitoring for complications. After that, outpatient care and counseling." He looked at Hadley. "You saved her life, getting her out when you did. Another few weeks and—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Hadley nodded, unable to find words. A nurse arrived with a cot, setting it up beside Autumn's bed without being asked. "For you," she said to Hadley, "you look like you're about to fall over. Rest. We'll watch over both of you." Hadley wanted to protest, wanted to stay vigilant, but her body had other ideas. She collapsed onto the cot and was asleep before the nurse finished adjusting the blankets. She woke to afternoon light streaming through the window and Sentinel's nose pressed against her hand. The dog had somehow made it past hospital regulations and lay beside the cot, warm and solid. Hadley sat up carefully, every muscle protesting. Autumn was awake, propped on pillows, picking at a meal tray. She looked up when Hadley moved and managed a small smile. "Hey," Autumn said. Her voice was stronger now, more present. "Hey, yourself." Hadley moved to the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but alive. That's something." Autumn set down her fork. "The doctor said you came into the mine alone, that you faced down armed men to get to me. I had help, a very good turn, and a desperate criminal trying to redeem himself. Still, you came." Autumn's eyes filled with tears. "For 14 months I told myself you were looking, that you hadn't given up. But there were days when I couldn't believe it anymore. When it seemed impossible that anyone would care enough to keep trying." Hadley took her sister's hand. "I never stopped. Not for one day. Every hour I wasn't working, I was investigating, following leads, building evidence. I was going to find you or die trying. You almost did die. The nurse told me you had hypothermia, that you were minutes from collapse when you reached the mine. But I didn't collapse, and you're here, safe." Hadley squeezed her hand. "Everything else is just details." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind sisters share when words aren't necessary. Outside, the world continued its business, but in this room time moved differently. Slower, gentler. A knock at the door broke the quiet. Victoria Landry entered, followed by a younger agent carrying a laptop. She nodded respectfully to both women. "Miss Pierce, Officer Pierce, I'm sorry to intrude, but I need to brief you on where the investigation stands." Hadley straightened. "Go ahead." Victoria set the laptop on the rolling table and opened it, displaying a document dense with text and photographs. "Wallace Drexler has been formally charged with 32 counts, including human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, corruption, and murder in the first degree. We recovered financial records showing payments to 14 other officers across 3 states. All of them are currently in custody." 14, Hadley's voice was hollow. "It went that deep." "Deeper. Drexler was middle management. The operation was coordinated by Deputy Chief Thomas Warren. He's been running this pipeline for 23 years. Victoria's face was grim. "We found manifests, transport schedules, records going back to the early 2000s. There are at least 47 documented victims. 19 are still missing. We're working on finding them." Autumn had gone pale. 23 years. All that time. Yes, and he hid it by being exactly what everyone expected. A dedicated officer, a family man, someone above suspicion. Victoria closed the laptop. "Your sister's investigation broke it wide open. The files she'd compiled, the patterns she'd documented, gave us everything we needed to build a case we'd been chasing for almost a year." "What about the others?" Hadley asked. "The women we found, where are they now?" "Being treated here and at 2 other facilities. All stable, all receiving counseling and support. Family notifications are ongoing." Victoria paused. 3 of them have no family left. We're working on placement and long-term care." Hadley thought about those women, about what they'd endured, about futures that would be built from the rubble of trauma. They'll need help, real help, not just immediate care. "Agreed, Amen. I'm working with victim services to establish a dedicated support program. It's going to take funding, resources coordination. Victoria looked at Hadley with new respect. I'd like you to be involved. As a consultant at minimum, these women trust you. That matters. I'm just a patrol officer. No, you're the cop who never gave up, who broke department corruption, who walked into hell to save her sister and 10 other women. Victoria's voice was firm. That's not just anything. Hadley didn't have words to respond. She simply nodded. Victoria stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. Jack Thorne and Deputy Greer. They held off 4 armed attackers long enough for you to escape. Greer's recovering from his head injury, expected to make a full recovery. Thorne? She smiled slightly. He disappeared from the hospital this morning, left against medical advice. But he left something for you. She handed Hadley an envelope. Inside a note written in precise handwriting. Officer Pierce, Sentinel has decided you need him more than I do. He's never been wrong about these things. Take care of each other. The mountains will still be here if I'm needed again. Jack Thorne. Hadley looked down at Sentinel, who gazed back with those steady amber eyes. A gift, a partner, a connection to a man who'd risked everything without expecting anything in return. Tell him thank you, Hadley said. Tell him I'll take good care of Sentinel. And tell him, she paused, choosing words carefully. Tell him some debts can't be repaid, only honored. Victoria nodded. I'll pass that along, if I can find him. She left and the room settled back into quiet. Autumn reached down to scratch behind Sentinel's ears, and the dog's tail thumped against the floor. I like him, Autumn said. He feels safe. Yeah, Hadley agreed. He does. The days that followed passed in a blur of medical care debriefings and the slow work of healing. Hadley stayed at the hospital, sleeping on the cot, leaving only when absolutely necessary. Sentinel became a permanent fixture, the hospital staff having given up on trying to enforce regulations against his presence. On the 5th day, Landon Greer visited. His head was still bandaged, but his eyes were clear and focused. He carried flowers and wore civilian clothes that looked strange on his broad frame. Hey, partner, he said to Hadley, heard you saved the day while I was napping. You were concussed, not napping, and you held off attackers while injured. That's not nothing. Landon set the flowers on the windowsill and turned to Autumn. Miss Pierce, I'm Landon Greer. I worked with your sister. I'm sorry we couldn't find you sooner. Autumn smiled, the expression still fragile but genuine. You found me eventually. That's what matters. They talked for an hour, easy conversation that carefully avoided the worst details. When Landon left, he pulled Hadley aside. The chief wants to see you when you're greedy. There's talk of commendations, promotions. The whole department's being restructured after everything. I don't want commendations. I want to make sure this never happens again. Then come back, help us rebuild, make it better. Landon's voice was earnest. We need people who care more about the badge than the power it brings. That's you. Hadley promised to think about it, though she already knew her answer. 3 days after the rescue, Jack Thorne stood on the porch of his cabin, watching morning light paint the mountains gold. The storm had passed. The world had moved on. But something had shifted inside him. For 3 years, he'd hidden here, convincing himself that isolation was healing, that if he stayed quiet enough, still enough, the voices from Kandahar would fade. They hadn't. But that night in the storm, holding the line while Hadley ran for help, he'd heard something else. Not the voices of men who'd died, the voice of the man he used to be, the one who'd believed that some things were worth fighting for. A truck pulled up the drive. Agent Victoria Landry stepped out carrying an envelope. Officer Pierce asked me to deliver this, she said, handing it over. Inside a photo. Hadley and Autumn, arms around each other in the hospital, both smiling. Sentinel sat between them, tail mid-wag. On the back, in Hadley's handwriting, thank you for teaching me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act anyway. You saved more than our lives. You reminded us what it means to protect and serve. Sentinel has found his purpose. I hope you find yours. HP. Jack stared at the photo for a long time. Then he looked at Victoria. That communication system you mentioned, the task force, when do you need me? Victoria smiled. Whenever you're ready. Jack folded the photo carefully and slipped it into his pocket. I'm ready now. 6 months later, the world looked different. The Intermountain Human Trafficking Task Force occupied a new facility on the edge of Blackridge, its walls covered with maps and photographs and evidence boards. Hadley stood at the front of the briefing room, wearing the detective's shield she'd earned not through politics, but through results. 3 new disappearances, she said to the assembled team. Blue Ridge area. Pattern matches known trafficking routes. We move fast and we move smart. Landon fully recovered, and now her official partner nodded from his seat. I've coordinated with local PD. They're standing by. Autumn sat at the back of the room taking notes. She'd become a victim advocate working with the task force to help survivors navigate the system. The work was hard triggering at times, but she'd found purpose in it, found a way to transform trauma into action. After the briefing ended, Hadley walked outside to find Jack Thorne waiting by his truck. He looked the same, maybe slightly less haunted. The mountains had been kind to him in the months since that storm. Heard you might need a communication consultant, he said. Storm season's coming. Want to make sure your radios work when it matters. Hadley smiled. We could use that. The county approved funding for a proper system. Someone who knows what they're doing would help. They walked together toward the facility, Sentinel trotting between them. The dog had adapted to his new life with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, splitting time between Hadley's apartment and training sessions with the task force. Inside, Jack examined the existing radio equipment with critical eye. This is garbage, 15 years old, frequencies that interfere with each other. He made notes. I can do better, but it'll take time and budget. We have both. Make it happen. As Jack worked, Hadley returned to her office to find Victoria waiting. The FBI agent held a folder, her expression serious. We found another location, Victoria said. Montana, same operation, different management. Could be 6 more victims. Hadley took the folder and opened it, scanning reports and photographs. Her jaw tightened. When do we move Akayum? Tomorrow. I want you leading the tactical team. You've earned that. I'll be ready. That evening, Hadley visited the small house she'd bought on the edge of town. Autumn was there cooking dinner with a kind of normalcy that still felt miraculous. Sentinel lay near the stove, ever watchful, ever patient. Smells good, Hadley said, hanging up her jacket. Lasagna, Mom's recipe. Figured it was time to try making it again. Autumn's hands were steady as she worked, scars fading but still visible on her wrists. They ate together, talking about small things. Work, weather, the new training program Autumn was developing for victim advocates. The conversation was easy, comfortable, the kind sisters have when they've been given a second chance and refuse to waste it. After dinner, they sat on the porch with coffee, watching the sun set over the mountains. Sentinel lay between them, content. You're leaving tomorrow, Autumn said. It wasn't a question. Montana, possible rescue operation. Be careful. Always am. Hadley set down her coffee. You okay with that, me going back out there? Autumn was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. For a long time, I was angry you had to be the one, that it couldn't just be over. But then I realized something. Those women in Montana, they're me 6 months ago, waiting, hoping, believing someone might care enough to look. She met Hadley's eyes. So yeah, I'm okay with it, because you're going to bring them home. Hadley reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. No words needed. They sat until full dark, watching stars emerge one by one over the mountains. Somewhere in those peaks, in a cabin that stood against worse storms than this, Jack Thorne was probably working on radio equipment or splitting wood or doing whatever solitary work filled his days. And somewhere beyond the mountains, in towns and cities across 6 states, families waited for news that might never come. Unless people like Hadley kept looking, kept fighting, kept believing that justice, though delayed, was still worth pursuing. The next morning, Hadley loaded her gear into the task force vehicle. Landon was already there, checking equipment with the methodical attention of someone who'd learned that details mattered. Victoria arrived last, carrying briefing folders for the team. We go in quiet, locate the victims, extract safely. FBI takes lead on arrests. Questions. No one had questions. They'd done this before. Would do it again. As they pulled out, Hadley looked back to see Autumn standing in the doorway with Sentinel. Her sister raised one hand in farewell, and the dog's tail wagged. They would be there when she returned. A home to come back to, a purpose to serve, a future built from the wreckage of the past. The vehicle turned onto the highway, heading north toward mountains that held secrets and suffering in equal measure. But also possibility, also hope. Because evil, no matter how carefully hidden, could still be dragged into the light by people stubborn enough to keep looking, strong enough to keep fighting, brave enough to walk into the dark, knowing they might not walk back out, but walking anyway, because someone had to. And Hadley Pierce, who'd once been just a patrol officer with a missing sister and a stubborn heart, had learned she was exactly the kind of person who could. The mountains rose ahead, beautiful and brutal and waiting. And somewhere in them, women who didn't yet know they'd been found were holding on for one more day, one more hour, one more minute. until rescue arrived in the form of a detective who never quit a team that believed in second chances, and a German shepherd who knew his job was to protect the ones who protected others. The sun climbed higher, burning off morning mist, and the vehicle disappeared into distance, carrying hope toward those who needed it most. Behind them in Black Ridge Autumn, Pierce stood in the doorway and whispered a prayer for her sister's safety. Then she turned back to her work, to the survivors she was helping rebuild their lives, to the mission they now shared. The fight wasn't over, might never be over, but they were winning, one rescue at a time, one survivor at a time, one day at a time, and that finally was enough.